Ilior Dane stumbled through the docking bay, cursing softly under his breath as he tripped over a loose maintenance cable. The station hummed around him, a low, constant vibration that seemed to seep into his bones, reminding him that zero-gravity maintenance was nobody's idea of fun. He had spent the last 10 minutes trying to convince a hovering protocol drone that he was not, in fact, part of the cleaning crew. The drone ignored him entirely, buzzing in place like an impatient mosquito, lights blinking in what Ilior imagined were judgments. "Seriously," he muttered, glancing at the display panel overhead, "I'm a human, not a battery pack for your cosmic mood swings." A loud klaxon cut through the hum, followed by the slightly terrified squawk of a security droid that had mistaken him for an intruder. Ilior rolled his eyes. "Relax, I don't bite, unless someone steals my coffee. Then it's war." The hum shifted into a staccato rhythm as he reached the main corridor of the Celestara Council, where alien diplomats in flowing robes and shimmering uniforms moved like liquid metal, each more graceful and unreadable than the last. Ilior felt, as usual, like a particularly clumsy comet drifting through their orbit. He had been briefed that today's meeting was critical, though the briefings themselves had been written in the Arathin dialect, which, as far as Ilior could tell, sounded like a cross between a xylophone and someone trying to whistle underwater. He hadn't understood a word. The human embassy had graciously provided a translation device, which was currently beeping in annoyance because Ilior had accidentally dropped it in a puddle of synthetic coolant earlier. "Okay," he muttered, "this is officially a terrible day, but at least I have my boots." He looked down at them, sleek, magnetic grip combat boots that were supposed to help him navigate the station. In practice, they made him trip spectacularly whenever he forgot the simplest rule of zero-gravity physics: boots do not equal traction. The chamber opened ahead, a swirl of light and color, walls alive with holographic projections of star systems, each twinkling point representing a council member's homeworld. Ilior paused, mentally rehearsing the smile he intended to wear when meeting Velira for the first time. He had read the files, of course, the brief biography, the official portrait, the one candid holovid clip of her laughing at a cafeteria accident on her homeworld. Her species, the Arathin, were almost indistinguishable from humans, except for their long, elegant ears that trailed like silver ribbons, and a certain grace that humans were apparently genetically incapable of replicating. According to the files, she could look at someone and immediately discern their temperament. Ilior had always suspected that if she did this to him, she would probably think, "Well, you're doomed." Velira entered the chamber, her arrival silent except for the subtle whoosh of her robes. Her ears flicked just once like a warning signal, and Ilior's stomach did a somersault. He tried to straighten, to look confident, but the boots betrayed him, catching a ridge in the floor panel and sending him skidding 3 steps sideways before recovering with what he hoped was a casual shrug. "Ah," he said, laughing nervously, "just testing gravity for science." The council members muttered among themselves, an alien chorus of clicks, whistles, and occasional guttural tones. Ilior counted at least 3 species he had never even known existed. One was a gelatinous blob that occasionally made a noise resembling a snort. Another had 2 heads, one of which seemed to glare at him while the other nodded politely. The third was small, spiky, and mobile like an over-caffeinated hedgehog with too many limbs. He nodded in acknowledgement, thinking that diplomacy would be easier if he could just pretend they were all very polite furniture. Suddenly, the chamber lights flickered, and the soft hum of the station shifted to a harsher vibration. Ilior's heart picked up. He had spent enough time in orbiting stations to know that flicker never ended well. The translator device, now back in his hand after a valiant rescue from the puddle, chirped out a warning. "Unauthorized hull breach detected. External threat approaching." Ilior blinked. "Ah, right," he muttered, "and here I thought it was just a Tuesday." He glanced at Velira. Her eyes were steady, a calm sea in the midst of the digital storm, but her ears twitched slightly. A subtle sign of tension, perhaps, or maybe she was just trying to ignore him. The first wave of invaders hit the outer observation deck. Ilior had seen star pirates before, or at least what humans called star pirates. A motley collection of robotic and organic hybrids who wore their fashion sense like armor, mostly in clashing neon shades. They moved in with coordinated aggression, their weapons spitting plasma arcs that bounced harmlessly off the outer shields but rattled the station like angry toddlers on a drum. Ilior ducked behind a console, glancing around to see the guards scrambling like startled sheep. "And here I thought my coffee was stressful," he whispered, peeking out to assess the situation. He realized quickly that no one else was going to act. The guards had fled to what they apparently considered safe zones, leaving Valira exposed at the center of the chamber. Without thinking, Ilior bolted, boots squeaking against the polished metal floor, dodging errant energy beams. He reached her side, yelling, "You may want to step behind this console or, I can try hero mode." Valira raised an eyebrow, one long ear flicking in amusement. "You are oddly persistent," she said. Her tone suggested that oddly persistent was either praise or a very subtle insult. Ilior grinned, brushing imaginary dust from his uniform. "I prefer heroically stubborn. Rolls off the tongue better." As they worked together to coordinate the chamber's defenses, Ilior kept up a running commentary. "That one looks scary, but it's really just missing a leg," he said, pointing at a mercenary drone that had stumbled into a console. "Honestly, I think it just needs a hug and maybe a sandwich." Valira's lips quirked in something approaching a smile, which Ilior counted as a win. He activated a malfunctioning turret, somehow managing to hit the incoming threat while tripping over his own shadow. The mercenary skidded to a halt, momentarily dazed, giving Valira time to unleash a precise energy pulse that knocked two more off their trajectory. For a moment, chaos and laughter intertwined. The station rocked, alarms blared, and Ilior delivered commentary like a game show host in a disaster special. "Ladies and gentle beings, welcome to the thrilling world of zero-gravity heroics. Watch as I barely prevent total annihilation while looking fabulous." Valira rolled her eyes but didn't move away. She stayed, subtly adjusting panels with precision that Ilior could only admire. She was brilliant, she was terrifying, and somehow she tolerated him. By the end of the first confrontation, the immediate threat was repelled, leaving a scattering of disabled drones and a couple of slightly singed floors. Ilior leaned against a console, breathing hard, trying to look nonchalant. "Well," he said, giving a mock bow, "that's enough heroics for one day. We're basically the stars of a space opera, minus the dramatic music." Valira's long ears twitched again, a silent acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, this human was not entirely useless. They stood there, two figures amid the flickering lights and lingering smoke, as the first sparks of camaraderie, or insanity, began to form. Ilior, brushing soot off his jacket, gave a thumbs up. "Next time," he said, "I promise to bring coffee for everyone. Well, at least for me. You might need something stronger." Valira's eyes glimmered, a tiny spark of amusement betraying her otherwise unflappable demeanor. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of orbiting metal and stars, Ilior felt like maybe, just maybe, he had a place here, despite everything. The alarm continued to wail as Ilior tried to catch his breath, which proved surprisingly difficult considering that zero gravity had a way of making even sitting feel like cardio. Valira stood nearby, adjusting a series of holographic controls with precision that made Ilior's head spin. Her ears flicked, one twitching like a metronome set to danger, the other trailing gracefully against her shoulder. "You seem surprisingly resilient," she said, her voice calm but carrying a hint of amusement. Ilior grinned, brushing non-existent dust from his uniform. "I've had practice," he said, "mostly in surviving office meetings and awkward family dinners. But hey, practice is practice." The next wave of invaders hit faster than anyone could react. Ilior dove toward the nearest console, sliding across the polished floor with the grace of a drunken comet. Plasma bolts streaked past, and somewhere behind him, a guard squealed as a hovering drone accidentally tripped over its own cable. "Seriously," Ilior shouted, "someone get a mop or a manual, preferably both." He pressed a series of buttons, accidentally activating a maintenance lift that swung wildly through the chamber. One mercenary drone bounced off it, spinning like a top before skidding into a pile of unsecured supplies. Ilior couldn't help but clap his hands. "Perfect, that's theater-quality chaos right there." Valira raised an eyebrow, her long ears twitching again. "Do you always treat threats like a game?" she asked. Ilior shrugged. "Only the ones that involve plasma cannons and space pirates. Otherwise, I stick to Sudoku." She rolled her eyes but didn't move to correct him, which Ilior took as tacit approval. The alien invaders were a strange mix of technology and biology, their limbs and exoskeletons glinting with energy conduits, each movement deliberate, almost choreographed. Most of the Council's guards had retreated to safer zones, leaving gaps in the defenses that Ilior improvised around. He grabbed a nearby security drone and shoved it forward, muttering, "Go on, little guy, make friends." The drone whirred to life and careened directly into a group of invaders, sending one tumbling into a storage crate with a satisfying crash. Ilior gave a thumbs up. Teamwork makes the dream work. Valira didn't interfere, instead using her telepathic attunement to anticipate the invaders' movements. She directed energy pulses with precision that Ilior could only admire while simultaneously trying to stay upright on the floor, which had become a skating rink of chaos. He rolled under a console and fired, accidentally hitting a nearby wall panel that released a stream of holographic confetti. "Ah," he said, adding flair, "I like it. Nothing like a little drama to impress the aliens." One of the mercenaries lunged at Valira, its mechanical claws glinting. Ilior didn't hesitate. He dove between them, grabbing the creature's wrist and twisting with all the awkward strength he could muster. The mercenary stumbled, sending sparks flying in all directions, and Ilior grunted. "I'm not exactly certified for this," he muttered, "but who cares? It's all part of the charm." Valira didn't flinch, her hand still gliding over the control panel, sending pulses that incapacitated two more invaders. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, caught Ilior's, and for a brief moment they shared a silent acknowledgement. Absurd, improbable, and effective. Another wave of intruders approached, faster and smarter than the last. Ilior grabbed a nearby maintenance bot and used it as a battering ram, sending the first drone careening into the wall. The bot, confused and slightly dented, whirred apologetically. "It's fine," Ilior said, patting it awkwardly. "You did great. Most of us would have panicked." Valira allowed herself a small smile, ears twitching in amusement. "Do you always improvise like this?" she asked, still calmly controlling the room's defenses. Ilior leaned against a console, panting. "Improvisation is my middle name." "Well, technically it's Harold, but that doesn't sound nearly as heroic." Valira's lips curved in what Ilior interpreted as faint amusement, though she probably considered it beneath her dignity. He didn't care. He considered it a win. The mercenaries, frustrated by their inability to breach the control hub, began to retreat, regrouping near the outer sections of the station. Ilior seized the moment, activating a nearby drone squad to harass them. The drones zoomed off, spinning in chaotic formations and somehow driving the intruders into one another. Ilior laughed. "See, nothing like a little friendly chaos to ruin a bad day." Valira finally looked up from the holographic displays, her long ears flicking with interest. "Your methods are unorthodox," she said, "but effective. I cannot deny the results." Ilior bowed theatrically despite the low gravity. "Why, thank you, madam. I aim to please, or at least not get eaten alive." As the immediate threat receded, Ilior and Valira found themselves alone in the control chamber. surrounded by flickering consoles and the remnants of the battle. Ilior's hair was mussed, his uniform singed in a few places, and a smudge of plasma residue decorated his cheek. He grinned at Valira. Well, that was fun, wasn't it? I'd give it an 8 out of 10 for drama, 7 out of 10 for near-death experiences, and 10 out of 10 for my heroic improvisation. Valira's ears twitched once, almost imperceptibly. You are infuriating, she said, and Ilior for once took it as a compliment. Infuriating and oddly competent, she added. Ilior gave a small salute. I'll take it. Better than being ignored, right? They began to assess the chamber's systems. Ilior fumbling with consoles while Valira moved with grace, her long ears brushing gently against panels as she restored functionality. You know, Ilior said, if we survive this, I think we should patent my style of combat. Heroic slapstick, guaranteed to confuse and terrify your enemies. Valira raised an eyebrow, one ear twitching. I suspect it would only terrify our allies. Ilior laughed, reaching for a panel labeled Emergency Coffee Reserve. Well, he said, at least someone can stay caffeinated while we clean up the mess. This day is officially sponsored by adrenaline and bad decisions. Valira shook her head, a quiet smile tugging at her lips, the first genuine amusement she had allowed herself since the alarm had sounded. The council would eventually arrive, reports would be filed, and guards would grumble about being outshone by a human. But in the quiet aftermath, Ilior and Valira shared a moment of understanding. He had stood when everyone else ran, and she had noticed. She did not yet trust him completely, but there was curiosity now, and a spark of admiration, both rare commodities in a galaxy full of pretense and protocol. Ilior floated near the window, peering out at the streaking stars beyond the station's hull. You know, he said, space is a lot like life. You spin, you fall, sometimes you crash into a storage crate, but if you're lucky, you do it with style. Valira glanced at him, ears flicking. Perhaps, she said, but style alone rarely saves lives. Ilior grinned, tapping the side of his head. Ah, but it does make surviving more entertaining. And for the first time since the alarm had blared, the station felt almost manageable. Chaos still lurked in the corners, and somewhere beyond the outer decks, the mercenaries were plotting their next move. But Ilior, ever the improbable hero, and Valira, ever the calculating diplomat, had found an unspoken rhythm. They were two unlikely allies, bound by necessity, humor, and the stubborn refusal to back down, even when everyone else ran. Ilior floated in the command chamber, staring at a tangle of blinking lights and sparking panels like a child confronted with a particularly aggressive puzzle. Valira hovered beside him, her long ears brushing against the console as she calmly recalibrated the energy flow. You realize, she said, one eyebrow raised, that you have an extraordinary ability to survive chaos. Ilior smirked, reaching for a nearby panel with a casual flick that might have been heroic or completely idiotic. I prefer to think of it as creative problem-solving, and let's be honest, chaos is my middle name. Well, not legally, but it fits. The outer sensors buzzed again, this time with a more coordinated signal. The mercenaries had returned, regrouped with larger numbers and more sophisticated tech. Ilior glanced at the readout, then at Valira. This is getting less like a friendly game of laser tag and more like a very expensive fireworks show. You know, the kind where someone always loses an eyebrow. Valira's lips twitched slightly, a faint smile in the storm. Try not to lose yourself entirely, she said. Ilior grinned. No promises. He grabbed a maintenance drone, shoved it into a control hatch, and sent it buzzing toward the incoming wave. The drone's lights flashed wildly, confusing the attackers long enough for Valira to send a series of precise energy pulses that disabled half their ships before they could breach the outer hull. Ilior clapped his hands. See, coordinated chaos. I think we're getting the hang of this. A large mercenary mech slammed into the docking bay, its claws scraping against the hull. Ilior yelped and dove, rolling beneath a console as sparks rained down around him. Okay, note to self, he muttered. Mechs are not my friends. Definitely not coffee companions. Valira's hands moved in a blur, her ears flicking like twin radar dishes. She controlled the room's defenses with an elegance Elior could never hope to match. He watched in awe as she neutralized the mech's targeting system while still keeping an eye on the smaller drones. You're not half bad in a crisis, Valira said, almost conversationally. Elior, still crouched beneath the console, saluted. Flattery and sarcasm, I can work with that. Makes me feel like a proper hero, instead of just a guy who trips over wires. The mercenary leader, a towering hybrid of metal and bioorganic tissue, emerged from the wreckage of its own ship, scanning for the remaining defenders. Elior felt a pang of panic, then remembered something he had always relied on in tight spots: improvisation. He grabbed a hoverlift platform, tossed a crate of energy cells on it, and rigged it like a makeshift battering ram. Okay, gravity, don't fail me now, he whispered. With a swift push, the platform collided with the mech, sending it staggering backward. The mercenary leader roared, sparks flying, but Elior couldn't help but grin. And that, my metallic friend, is why humans are absurdly stubborn. Valira moved closer, her long ears trailing like banners behind her. You are infuriating, she said, and Elior took it as the highest compliment. Infuriatingly effective, he added, patting her hand lightly as she adjusted the controls for the final pulse that would disable the mech permanently. The pulse struck true, and the mercenary leader collapsed, sparks scattering across the chamber floor. For a moment, silence reigned. Elior floated midair, chest heaving, a smear of grease on his cheek. Well, he said, I'd say that's a win. 10 out of 10 for heroics, 11 out of 10 for style, and 0 out of 10 for personal safety. Valira's ears twitched in a rhythm that Elior decided was her version of laughter. Remarkably reckless, she said, and yet effective. I suppose there is merit in your methods. Elior bowed theatrically. Merit, charm, occasional luck, full package. The council arrived shortly after, cautiously surveying the damage. Guards grumbled about being outshone by a human, drones beeped apologetically, and holographic displays showed the outer hull intact, thanks to Valira's precise calculations and Elior's unconventional heroics. Valira addressed the council with poise, acknowledging the human envoy whose antics had, against all odds, helped protect the station. Elior stood awkwardly beside her, hands in pockets, pretending he had been composed the entire time. Later, in the quiet of the command chamber, Elior floated near the viewport, watching the stars streak by as the station adjusted its orbit. Valira joined him, ears brushing gently against the console. You have changed, she said, her tone soft. I expected humans to be chaotic and fragile. You are chaotic, yes, but also persistent in a way I did not anticipate. Elior shrugged, grinning. Yeah, well, chaos is one thing, persistence another. Together, they make me annoyingly effective. She studied him, her eyes reflecting the distant suns. You risked yourself when everyone else fled. That is rare among your species. Elior laughed softly. I like to think of it as selective courage. I pick my moments. Today just happened to be one of those times. They drifted together in the silence, the hum of the station a gentle reminder that life went on, that duty persisted, but that victory, messy, improbable, and hilarious, had been earned. Elior realized he had grown, not in muscles or technology, but in confidence, in trust, and in the understanding that sometimes, stepping forward when everyone else steps back made all the difference. Valira placed a hand on his shoulder, the faintest pressure, a human gesture that felt simultaneously alien and intimate. I suppose we should prepare for the next threat, she said, her ears twitching with amusement. Elior grinned, giving a mock salute. Next time I promise to bring extra coffee, and maybe a hoverlift or two, just in case. They looked out at the stars together, two unlikely allies who had discovered that courage could be both reckless and brilliant, that humor could survive even in the gravest danger, and that trust could grow in the unlikeliest of spaces. Elior realized he was no longer just the bumbling human envoy. He had become someone who could stand when others ran, someone who could inspire, frustrate, and ultimately protect. As the station settled into quiet orbit, the remnants of battle fading into controlled chaos, Elior turned to Valira one last time. "You know," he said, "this has been a lot of work, a lot of near-death experiences, and a lot of, well, me." She looked at him, her eyes glimmering with something he couldn't quite name. "You are memorable," she said. Elior laughed. "I prefer charmingly unforgettable, much better ring to it." And with that they floated in companionable silence, the stars stretching endlessly beyond the viewport, two figures shaped by chaos, courage, and laughter, ready to face whatever the galaxy decided to throw at them next together.